Hello, students of U.S. history, and welcome to the start of our next topic, which is World War II and the Holocaust, and its America's role in that. So today we're going to take a look at the situation facing Europe in the post-war world, post-World War I world. So we just finished talking about the Roaring Twenties and the Great Depression in American history. Meanwhile, while all of that was going on, the Roaring Twenties weren't the same over in Europe. The Roaring Twenties was certainly that was going on, but at the same time, a lot of totalitarian dictatorships are going to rise during the 1920s, which will have a very different feel to the culture of that time period than what we had it going on in America, which was far more ballyhoo, right? Another thing, too, is the Great Depression is going to fuel the fire of these totalitarian dictatorships. Before we get into what totalitarian dictators means, let's take a look at a little video to help set the stage for what is to come. War, propaganda, death. I mean, this is extreme stuff that's happening in Europe right now. And for us, if we take a look at the early 20th century political spectrum, I think it helps to put things in perspective here of exactly where these regimes are coming from. So keep in mind as we take a look at this modern political spectrum that it still relates to today. And although thankfully we don't see as many totalitarian dictators today, right? Now, this is also applicable to the United States, because if you look at the U.S., if you're a moderate, you're sitting in the middle, and you see the perspectives of both sides. Good for you. I like those kind of people. Now, if you are someone that is leaning conservative, then you would, in America, be what we would call a Republican. Now, if you are someone that is leaning to the left, you would be called a Democrat, or someone that is seen as a liberal. So liberals and Democrats to the left, and then we've got the conservatives, Republicans to the right. Now, if you are to the radical extreme of either of those two, that's where you start to get into the hyper-nationalistic or the ultra-socialistic weirdos that we don't like, okay? So here are some of those weirdos like the fascists and the Nazis. Two responses that are specific to Italy and Germany in this time period because of their hyper-nationalism and their ultra-conservatism. And then way out there to the radical left, we've got the Bolshevism and communism, which was characteristic of Mother Russia, or the Soviet Union at this time. So as we take a look at this political spectrum, let's look at what these people thought of themselves. Now, these are their ideals that they thought of themselves. So, for instance, in the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, that's the USSR. You need to know what that acronym means. The Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, the USSR or Soviet Union, is at this point in history that we'll be talking about today, headed by Joseph Stalin. And so Joseph Stalin, he has the ideals of communism leading to no private land. And so because Marx is anti-private land ownership because it breeds class conflict, they are against private land. Another thing that they are against is having a class-built hierarchical society. Instead, the communists want to have an egalitarian, classless society throughout their country and ultimately the world of workers and people being united. Another thing is that they say that it is positive for all human beings. Now, again, I just want to point out the fact that this is things that they think of themselves. Anybody that lives under the shadow of that face caterpillar on Stalin, that nasty mustache, knows that it is anything but pleasant pleasant or positive living in communist Russia, the utopia of the Soviet Union. Far from it. Now, to the polar opposite extreme, we've got on the left, we've got Stalin and the Soviet Union. To the polar opposite extreme is the hyper-nationalistic, ultra-conservative groups known as fascists and Nazis. The term fascism, I'll give you the definition for that later. Nazi is something that is specifically German. Fascist is something specifically Italian. And the Italian leader that will come to power in the 1920s is Benito Mussolini, and the leader that, of course, will come to power in 1933 in Germany is Adolf Hitler with the Nationalsozialistische Deutsche Arbeiterparty. Try and say that fast 5 times. Nationalsozialistische Deutsche Arbeiterparty, the National Socialist German Workers' Party, and it is the Nazis. It's shortened to Nazis from National. So these guys believe strictly in private property. Private property must be maintained at all costs. They also believe in a hierarchical, natural order kind of society in which, you're born into wealth, you stay in wealth. You've got your money because you worked for it, you keep that money. It doesn't go to someone else because of Bolshevism or communism. And they also operate under the idea that we will destroy our enemies in order to overcome the problems of society. Those problems and those enemies that cause those problems must be destroyed. If you take a look at the Nazi swastika, which Hitler himself is going to design based upon an ancient symbol. There's an ancient symbol of the swastika, which if you do the mirror image of it, the inverted symbol of it, it actually means peace. However, the Nazis, Hitler is going to invert that symbol away from peace and instead mean war. He's also going to tilt it so that the swastika shows us that the Nazis are on the move. They feel like they're on the move to destroy their nemesis wherever they may be. So again, these are the things that that both sides think of themselves. But if you look at their methods and if you look at the way in which they act in their countries that they will come to dominate, their methods are all very similar. And so the reality is that while they say that they are starkly different and opposed to one another, that's all demagoguery, a chance for them to gain power because they say we're against those other guys. But really, they're the same type of thing. And totalitarianism is different from previous dictatorships. We've seen dictatorships throughout world history of like a king that doesn't give rights to their people. But what makes totalitarians so different is that they have technology on their side, whether it be radio or listening devices or secret police, mass propaganda, the use of a reign of terror constantly. I mean, they know how to keep a society under wraps. They know how to create a religion out of worshiping of the state or worship of the leader, a cult of personality, and a messianic kind of idea in which we feel we're being saved from all the problems in the world by this divine leader. And so totalitarianism takes it so much further than anything we've seen before in world history. All right, as you heard, Joseph Stalin, a nasty man, not the kind of guy you'd want to live under that face caterpillar, am I right? Well, Joe Stalin, his name means man of steel. His real name is actually Joseph Jukashvili, and as a young man, as a young lad, he was training to be in the priesthood, ironically. He wanted to be an Orthodox priest, and then he got kicked out because he's actually an atheist. So then he turned to the Bolshevik Party and to communism, Marxism, revolutionary socialism, and he will take on the nom de guerre, or the warrior name of the man of steel, Joseph Stalin. And so he will rise up very quickly in the Bolshevik Party in the midst of the Bolshevik Revolution. So the Bolsheviks, remember, they are the revolutionary socialists that are going to overthrow the Tsar, overthrow the other groups within Russian society that were trying to do things more moderately, maybe bring about some reform without actually dramatically changing Russia to become a nasty communist state. But the Bolsheviks, they wanted communism, they wanted to get rid of all opposition. They did it in the October Revolution and then subsequent Civil War. Now, part of that was that they killed the Tsar and his ministers. So they overthrew the Tsar, they killed the Tsarina, they killed all the little Tsardines, and they, after machine gunning these people, threw them down a well, and then are going to convert the nation of Russia into a socialist country. Now, in the process, the leader of this thing was Vladimir Lenin. And I hate to say that Vladimir Lenin isn't that bad of a guy, But compared to Stalin, he wasn't that bad of a guy. Okay, he's a revolutionary. He's an idealist. I certainly wouldn't mind sitting down to have coffee with him and pick his mind a little bit, because I'm confident that he wouldn't pull out a pistol and shoot me in the midst of that conversation. Not the case with Stalin. Okay, with Vladimir Lenin, he had some ideas that were starkly different from Stalin. And he recognized that. Lenin knew that. And so he actually, when he died younger than he expected, don't we all? But he died younger than he expected, and he had kind of planned to remove Joseph Stalin from the Bolshevik Party. But he didn't get the chance, because he died of a brain aneurysm too quickly. So he wrote it in his will. All right, now that's intriguing, because in the midst, after this civil war that took place in Russia that established Lenin as the dictator of the Soviet Union, he had planned to transfer power into what's called a collective, a party collective, so that it wasn't a dictator that was in power, but instead it would be the party of workers, and they would move toward that communist utopia they had all envisioned. But Vladimir Lenin dies before he has a chance to make that happen. So in his will, he actually put in a phrase that is going to be read after his funeral. Okay, so Joseph Stalin is the guy that's in charge of the will, because he's in an area of the party called the Secretariat. And within this will, Joseph Stalin was having it read to the Communist Party, and in it said, Joseph Stalin is a dangerous man. Someone must remove him from the party. That was what Lenin said in his will. And so Stalin's sitting there with his notepad and his pen, and he's kind of watching to see everybody's reaction. And if you had guys that were like, yeah, we should remove Stalin, he's a bad guy, that guy's name goes on Stalin's pad of people to kill. And then if you've got people that are like, what did they just say? And they're kind of like, no, I'm not going to make eye contact with Stalin, I want him to know I don't like him. Then their names would go on the people of, I'm not going to kill that person yet. Okay, so Stalin is going to rise to power in the Soviet Union, because even though it was supposed to be a party collective, he wants to maintain the dictatorship. And he's in competition with another idealist who's very much like Lenin and has much, I would say, again, nicer ideas of how to run the country, and that guy's name is Leon Trotsky. Well, Stalin is going to do a number of mechanizations to isolate Trotsky and his friends, like tens of thousands of friends and followers, away from the party, and they'll slowly but surely start getting killed in a reign of terror. All right, Trotsky himself is going to run off to Mexico in the late 1920s, and then he'll end up in Mexico in 1940, hanging out with Frida Kahlo. You might remember Frida Kahlo as the artist with the unibrow, who is, always like sitting like that in her portraits. Well, she was a commie, and she's hanging out in Mexico with Leon Trotsky, her friend, and one night, one of Stalin's henchmen comes by with an ice pick, and ice picks him in the back of the head, killing him dead with an assassination. After that, it's just a matter of Stalin removing one guy after another. I mean, he's going to create what's called 5-year plans. The 5-year plans are Stalin's attempt at rapidly industrializing Russia. And there are people that will resist that, because it's forcible industrialization, which, I mean, there are good things that come out of it. For instance, there's going to be more food produced. There's also going to be, they're going to make Russia the second or third largest producing country in the world, and therefore having all these economic gains. And they're also going to rapidly get electricity in there. They're going to see a much higher rate of literacy, both amongst men and women and children. And so, good things do happen, but at what cost? Because as you saw in the video, a lot of people are going to die as the result of his 5-year plans, because anyone that resists is removed. Some of the people that chose to resist were a group of people called the kulaks. Kulaks are peasants that wanted to own their own land, and also, and that can't be allowed, because Stalin is planning to collectivize or nationalize the lands and take all the food that these peasants are producing from them. And when they don't like that and they protest it, he has them machine gunned down into death pits. All right, so the kulaks are getting killed because of collectivization. Meanwhile, there's going to be a reign of terror that Stalin creates, in which they will build gulags in Siberia. And then when you end up in one of these gulags, it's essentially like the kinds of death camps that the Nazis will later create, in which you're slowly but surely being worked to death. And those that become political enemies of Stalin, there's a list of about 40 or 50,000 people that were friends of Trotsky, or they didn't like Stalin, or they believed in different ideals from Stalin. He'll personally sign the death warrants for these people and have them shot in the back of the head or killed by firing squad, or you name it, killed by the Cheka, which is the secret police under Joseph Stalin, and later the NKVD, which is, again, their secret police. He's going to perpetrate a reign of terror that may have killed as many as 3 to 5 million people. At least another 8 million people were arrested. This guy is a mass murdering lunatic. And yet, who's going to be our ally in World War II? This guy. And the reason being because war makes interesting bedfellows. All right, so that's the situation in Russia right now. Let's take a look at what's happening in Europe. In other parts of Europe, like in Italy and Germany in particular, but also in Portugal and in Spain and all throughout southeastern Europe, there are fascist, hyper-nationalistic movements that are getting started. It all begins in Italy, and we'll see that story here in a little bit. But first, let's take a look at the legacy of World War I and the ways in which fascists and Nazis are going to sweep through Europe with their ideology. Okay, first of all, some of their characteristics and their method. The first big thing about Nazis or fascists, I'll just use the term intermittently here, the first major idea that they have is that they want to protect your wealth and protect your gains, and they will do it by killing the Bolsheviks and removing all Bolsheviks, because communists, Bolsheviks, these guys want to take your money, and so we need to get rid of them, and the best way to do it is to illegalize them as a party, not give them any freedom of speech, and then, you know, slowly but surely they disappear. And how do they disappear? Well, we don't really talk about that. So they're anti-communist, which is interesting, because if you look at the name for the National Socialist German Workers' Party, which is the Nazi party, I'll say it to you here in German. It's the Nationalsozialistische Deutsche Arbeiter Party, the National Socialist German Workers' Party. All right, now, isn't it interesting that they claim that they're anti-communist, anti-socialist, anti-Bolshevik, and yet they have the term socialism right there in their name. The reason? It's perfect propaganda, because they're going to say, oh, we hate the Bolsheviks, but workers, German workers, we're all about you. We want to help you in this thing. And so Hitler and the Nazis find a way to wield influence over both sides, the middle class that wants to keep their money because they hate the Bolsheviks, and appeal to the workers that otherwise might like communism. And so they're saying, hey, we're looking out for both your sides. Perfect propaganda if you're trying to become a nasty dictator. And then another thing that they are is they are violent and they're militaristic. No matter which country you're in, again, whether it's Italy, Germany, Spain, Portugal, southeastern European countries, these countries are all going to believe that you must have a hyper-nationalized self-importance, in which these guys are walking around in uniforms of various colors. In Italy, it's the black shirts, and in Germany, it's the brown shirts, and then the black shirts Schutzstaffel as well. And we have a secret state police, and these guys spread terror through the people that want to resist. Now, don't make the assumption that this is the only way that they're coming to power, because the Nazis are going to come to power, and the fascists in Italy will come to power through a combination of persuasion and intimidation. I want you to make that clear. Write that down in your notes. Persuasion and intimidation. So they use persuasion to get people's attention, to make big promises, to say we have the solutions to fix these problems. And yet, when that doesn't work, or when you got Bolsheviks running around, or Jews who don't like you, or you name it, when you've got people running around that resist, that's when intimidation comes in. Do not make the fatuous assumption that Hitler and the Nazis, or Mussolini in Italy, is going to come to power because people felt forced solely through fear. This is a popular movement that many people like, and they come to power through the vote. All right, they will use, yes, persuasion and intimidation, but they need the persuasion aspect in order to get people's attention to vote them into power. Mussolini will not take power through a militaristic kind of thing, but he gains power through people voting for him into office, and then he'll start to illegalize the opposition. Same thing with Hitler. He tried to overthrow the government, and it failed miserably. So 10 years later, they will vote him into office to become the leader of Germany legally, politically. And so these legal methods are required to gain power. Now, when you gain power, though, you don't keep democracy. You remove democracy once you've achieved your goal. And this is what both of these groups are going to do, and do it very, very effectively. Another thing that they do in order to help them gain that persuasion aspect is by creating a cult of personality. A cult of personality is the creation of a messianic type of leader. Messianic, meaning Messiah. And, Christ dying on the cross for us saved us. And so a messianic leader is someone that is coming down from heaven to save us through all of the questions and the problems of society and fix all of our problems. All right, you can see that through some of their propaganda that they created at the time with this cult of personality. Here it says death to lies, Marxism, and high finance. So again, appealing to both sides here in Germany of those that fear Bolshevism and those that fear bankers that have too much influence. Death to lies, death to the Marxists that want to take your money, death to the capitalist fat cats that want to have all the money for themselves. This is part of that Nazi personality. Here we have the Italians that are actually kissing the flag. Priests in Italy at this time were actually saying that it's an idolatry to worship the fascist party or to kiss the fascist flag, but people will still do it because they are later going to be obligated by law to do it, but initially they see it as a nationalistic thing, like praise God that we have these leaders that are bringing us back out of the problems of society and the economic turmoil and the loss of the war and you name it. People legitimately want these things in many cases. And then here you can see another appeal to the Italians with their idea of creating, again, this cult of personality. Cult meaning, by the way, not purple Kool-Aid kind of cult, we're all going to commit suicide together, but cult meaning a religious devotion, religious following. So one way in which the fascists started this in the 1920s was they had a throwback to ancient Rome. So fascism is Italian, and they had this throwback to ancient Rome where the fascist salute actually comes from ancient Rome. And I hate to do this on camera, but the fascist salute, of course, is the arm outstretched. I won't do it, the normal way in case anyone screenshots this. But anyway, the fascist salute is the arm outstretched in a Sieg Heil 5 to each other, right? And the funny thing is, as people are doing that salute, the way to return that salute, if I'm Benito Mussolini, is I go like this, kind of frilly style, back at you guys, thanks. And so the fascist salute, I think, is kind of funny, but it comes from ancient Rome. Another symbol that comes from ancient Rome is this. It's called the fascissimo. The fascissimo was a bundle of sticks, aka a faggot bundle of sticks. So it's this bundle of sticks because a single stick, like a single arm, is easily broken, but a bundle of sticks, all of our arms together, all of the people together, is unity. And so the fascists say that we are unified together, but when that doesn't work, we have the axe of the state, the fear and power of the state to finish the job that the people themselves cannot do. It's scary, but this is the kind of thing that will grab a lot of attention at this time. Okay, another example of a messianic type of propaganda appeal you can see right here with Hitler as he is marching with all of these people. Behind him, I see a lot of different faces, but I don't see a single, individual, okay? An individual would mean they got something unique about them that tells me that they're an individual, unique person. I don't see that here. And the reason is because totalitarians were fond of saying that someone finds their individuality in the quotient of 1 million divided by 1 million. What does that mean? That means 1. The quotient of 1 million divided by 1 million is 1. That's where you find your individuality. You also find your individuality as a cell in the body of the state. Okay, if you look at this picture here, each of these men are cells within the body of the Nazi party, in the body of the state. Cells are expendable. All right, as I take a look at my hair, for instance, and I pluck out a hair, as I pluck out this random hair, it is not something I'm going to cry about, okay, because those are just cells that have just died. When I'm clipping my nails, I'm not, my poor nail cells, they're going goodbye. No, we don't care, because they're cells in the body, and they are expendable. You can get rid of these. It's the same thing for humankind. When you're living in a totalitarian regime, the cells in the body of the state are definitely expendable. And here you can see Hitler with the River Rhine behind him. You see Hitler in his uniform with the Hakenkreuzflag, as it's called, or the flag of martyrs, as he named it. And then behind him, you can see heaven is opening, and there's this scary Prussian eagle that's flying down from heaven. What's this a reference to? It is all a reference to Jesus and the baptism in the River Jordan. So Jesus was baptized in the River Jordan by John, and as that happened, a dove floated down majestically, heaven opened, light poured out, and said, "This is my son, listen to him." And then here you can see the River Rhine, Hitler's being baptized by his elite followers, and then the scary Prussian eagle comes down, and it's like the voice of God is saying, "This is my son, listen." It is extremely freaky. The rest of the poster actually says, "Es lebe Deutschland." Long live Germany. So this is a propaganda poster, yes, but again, many people finding these ideas very popular. Both Italy and Germany after World War I were in dire straits. They were in a tough situation. And because of that, the leaders that were rising to power easily were able to appeal to the people's fears and say, if you don't want the Bolsheviks to win and take all your money away from you, you need to vote for us. If you don't want these impure races out there, these Untermensch, like Jews, for instance, that they're going to say, if you don't want these impure races to ruin our lives, then you need to vote for me into power. And so demagoguery is a little review term for you here. It means using politics, using fear in politics to get what you want. So Hitler is the ultimate example of a demagogue in world history because he made such huge and dramatic lies, but unfortunately, people believed him. So I think it's easy for us as modern students and modern Americans to look back at the situation facing Europe and say, how could they? How could they bring people like these totalitarian dictators to power? And that's a little thing that we call hindsight bias, because it is very easy for us to say that they're stupid or they must have been brainwashed or something silly like that as to this is how they allowed someone like Hitler or Mussolini to come to power. But the fact is that it was a popular belief in Europe. It was also a popular belief in America. In fact, it's not just a European phenomenon, because there is a book that was written by Sinclair Lewis in 1935 called "It Can't Happen Here," which was written to Americans about Americans taking on a hyper-nationalistic, go America, to heck with all of the inferior races kind of idea. And he put it into this book, and in it he said, when fascism comes to America, it will be wrapped in the flag and carrying a cross. So essentially saying it will be an appeal to hyper-nationalism and Christianism, in order to get people to bring a fascist leader to power. And that is a threat that we could still face today. I mean, how easy is it to bring someone like that to power based on religion or based on, an us versus them kind of mentality, whether it's us, the Americans, versus the terrorism that's out there, or even back in the 1930s, there was a lot of anti-Semitism in America. A good indication of that, the KKK was one of the biggest parties, biggest third parties out there of people that wanted to see 100% Americanism. And many of them will become fascists and Nazis in the 1930s. A good indication of that is there's a documentary that came out a couple of years ago called A Night at the Garden. And it is documentary footage that was taken at a rally at Madison Square Garden where they sold out, and it was a bunch of fascists hanging out, a bunch of Nazis talking about the glories of Germany and how Germany's doing the right thing under Hitler. And as you can see, they've got George Washington there next to the American flag, which is right next to a Nazi swastika. This is scary, and this is something that easily could have spread to America and still could today. In the legacy of World War I, after World War I in Europe, things were in dire circumstances. Things were pretty ugly after World War I, and we'll start with Italy, and later we'll talk about Germany. So Italy after World War I was facing this time period where they, during the war, had been part of the Allies, so technically they were the winners in the war, but what they were going for in World War I was something they were not given once the war was over. What they wanted was area off what's called the Dalmatian coast, but Woodrow Wilson in the Treaty of Versailles was insistent upon not giving anyone any territorial gain as the result of fighting in the war. So all of the agreements that had been made that would have given Italy this new territory, Woodrow Wilson said, no, that belongs to Yugoslavia now, you can't have it. We're not going to we're creating a new country of Yugoslavia, Italy can't have it. So Italy was pissed because they didn't get what they wanted out of this war. They called this thing a mutilated victory. One of the guys that was especially upset about it, ironically, was a man who was a socialist newspaper writer before World War I, and that man is Benito Mussolini. So I say ironically because he was a socialist newspaper writer before the war, and then once the war got started, though, he became a fist-pumping ultra-nationalist. And he became a sniper in World War I for the Italians and was actually a decorated war hero. So then after the war, he started to take on the role of a fascist dictator. Now, the reason that happens is because Italy is facing 500% 8% inflation after World War I. Their economy is in shambles. They're heading into a Great Depression. Nobody has any savings accounts left because they've been annihilated by the price inflation that's going on, and there's a fear that Bolshevism is going to take over the country. So Mussolini appeals to those groups by saying, I have the answers you need. So they're going to vote, and the Italians, as they're voting, they will elect Mussolini as their prime minister in their parliament. Now, there's still a king in Italy. His name is Victor Emmanuel III. And he is going to look at the situation and say, I can't fix these issues, so I'm going to let Mussolini do it because he's a popular guy and he's got all the answers, apparently. So Mussolini is going to stage what's called his March on Rome. And as he does his March on Rome, he's going to take hold of the government, but then be able to make it so that he is able to get rid of all other parties that resist him. So here's a video. Now, something that I just want to re-emphasize. Remember that Mussolini was elected to the prime minister position, basically the head of the civil government, before the March on Rome. The March on Rome was largely a propaganda thing to say, hey, look how powerful and strong we are. We should have emergency dictatorial powers, meaning we're going to suspend democracy, make anybody who's not a fascist illegal, and then rebuild Italy in our image. And that's essentially what he's going to do. And after he establishes this dictatorship, he'll be a very popular leader. In fact, in the 1920s, they had this propaganda campaign called Mussolini Builds. And here you can see him wielding a pickaxe and building buildings. He can build any building. He races in race cars. He golfs a perfect score. He rides on horses that leap over barriers. This is a man that constantly works, and we should saluto al duce. So in Italy, they called Mussolini il duce, which means the leader, and so you should saluto al duce. And Time magazine is going to see what Mussolini is doing in Italy at this time and actually declare that he is Man of the Year in 1923. Here you can see him putting Italy on the move. It's moving around in the waters here. It's moving the right direction thanks to Mussolini that's putting Italy back on the move. It's kind of funny, though, because Italy's standard of living actually falls during Mussolini's time in the 1920s. But he's very good at propaganda and making everyone think that things are going great. So therefore, Mussolini establishes the first fascist dictatorship in Europe. After that, after the success of the March on Rome, many people are watching this. Franco, a guy in Spain who's also a fascist dictator in the making. Salazar in Portugal. Southeastern Europe is going to form a bunch of fascist autocracies as well. And then Adolf Hitler is keenly watching everything that's happening in Italy because he's got plans to do the same thing. Now, we won't get a chance to talk about Hitler until the next video, so stay tuned.